People always ask me who was the most dangerous player you ever watched, not faced watched, because watching Ken was something else entirely. He walked onto the court looking like, I don't know, someone who worked in a bank, small, quiet, no drama. You looked at him and thought, this is fine, I can handle this. That was the trap. The moment the ball started moving, everything changed. He didn't overpower you, he didn't intimidate you with his body or his serve, he just placed the ball again and again and again. Always deep, always precise, always exactly where you didn't want it. And when you made one mistake, just one, he was already there. No emotion, no celebration, just the next point. I've seen players who were dangerous because they were aggressive. Ken was dangerous because he was inevitable. That's a different kind of fear entirely. That's the kind that stays with you.
Look, I've seen every backhand in the history of this sport. I've hit against them, I've analyzed them, I've argued about them at 2 in the morning with people who probably had better things to do. And I'm telling you, Ken's backhand was not normal. It wasn't about power, that's what people get wrong. It wasn't this big aggressive swing, it was surgical. The ball came off his racket and it went exactly where he wanted it, shoelace height, every single time. You'd think you were in a decent position and then suddenly you're digging the ball out of your ankles wondering what just happened. You can't teach that, you can practice placement, you can work on your technique fine, but what Ken had was something else. He was a natural left-hander who learned to play right-handed. That backhand, that was his left arm doing what it was born to do. You cannot be serious if you think anyone else had that.
You want to know what made Ken terrifying? It wasn't one shot. It was the absence of mistakes. On clay, especially my surface, the surface I understood better than anyone that is the most suffocating thing imaginable. Because on clay, you have time, you have rallies, you have 50, 60 shots in a single point. And every single one of those 50 shots, Ken was making the right decision. People used to say, Ivan and I were boring to watch, too consistent, no drama. Well, Ken was even more boring than both of us combined. Every ball landed exactly where it should. No errors, no gifts, nothing. And somehow, that is the most terrifying thing you can face across a net. I think about this sometimes. The players who scared you with big shots, you could get used to that. You could find a rhythm against aggression. But against perfection, there is no rhythm. There is no adjustment. You just wait for something that never comes.
1974, Wimbledon, the US Open, 2 finals. I won both of them badly. And you know what I remember most? The crowd. American crowd on American soil cheering for an Australian because they felt sorry for him. 39 years old, this small, quiet guy on the other side of the net, and the whole stadium wanted him to beat me. I didn't care. I was there to win. That's what I do. But here's the thing nobody talks about. I've seen people pity Ken Rosewall, seen him, look at him, the age, the size, the quiet, and think, this one's done. And then they walk out there and he beats them 6-3 in the 5th. That's not sentiment. That's a warning. You could knock Ken down, you could beat him badly on a given day, but you could never count him out. Never. The moment you thought he was finished was exactly the moment you were in the most danger. I knew that. I always knew that.
I studied Ken, seriously studied him, watched the footage, analyzed the patterns. I approached it the way I approached everything systematically. You find a weakness, you build a game plan, you execute. Simple. The problem was the weakness. His serve was not big. Everyone knew that. So I thought, there it is. Attack the serve, take the return early, dominate from the baseline, reasonable plan, logical plan. And then I watched him use that same weak serve to construct points that ended exactly how he wanted. He'd serve to a specific spot not because it was fast, but because it set up the next shot. And the shot after that. It was like watching someone play chess while everyone else was playing checkers. I looked for something else. The movement under pressure, perhaps pattern in his positioning, nothing. Every time I found what looked like an opening, it wasn't actually an opening. He just made it look like one. That is not something you see very often. That is a different kind of intelligence entirely.
The 1972 WCT finals in Dallas. You have to understand what that match was. 21 million people watching on television. NBC interrupted their evening news for tennis. That had never happened before in America. And Ken was down in the final tiebreak. Match point against him. Rod Laver, the greatest player in the world at that moment, standing on the other side of the net, 1 point away from winning. What happened next is what separates Ken from almost everyone else who ever played this sport. He didn't panic. He didn't go for a desperate shot. He just found a backhand return that Rod had never seen before. Down the line, perfect depth. And then he did it again and again until it was over. Rod said afterwards, and I think about this a lot, he said, when your opponent is Ken, all bets are off. Even when you're 1 point from victory. And then Ken went into the locker room and cried, alone, nobody knew. That contrast, that complete silence on court, and then that release in private that tells you everything about who Ken Rosewall really was.
I'll be honest with you, when I was coming up, the name I kept hearing was Ken Rosewall. My coach, Pete Fisher, talked about the Australian players constantly, the way they conducted themselves, the way they played the game, Ken especially. There was a standard there that he wanted me to understand. My goal for a long time was simple, be in the same sentence as Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall. That was it. That was the whole thing. What struck me about Ken was the movement. People talk about the backhand and they're right too, but the movement was something else. He didn't chase balls. He was just already there. You'd hit what you thought was a winner, and somehow he'd materialized in exactly the right position to handle it. No wasted steps, no panic, just efficiency that didn't look human. I tried to bring that into my own game, that sense of being in the right place before the ball arrived. I never fully got there. I don't think anyone did. But Ken made it look like the most natural thing in the world.
Everyone prepared for the backhand. That was the reputation, the backhand, the backhand, the backhand, and it deserved the reputation. But here's what I think is the most interesting thing about Ken that nobody really talks about, the forehand. He took it on the rise early, before you had time to recover your position. And because everyone was so focused on protecting against the backhand moving, adjusting, thinking about the backhand, the forehand arrived like something you completely forgot existed. I'll tell you something embarrassing. I spent weeks before one match specifically preparing for his backhand, watching footage, working on my positioning, building a defensive structure around that one shot. Very thorough, very professional. He beat me with his forehand. That is actually funny, looking back. But it also tells you exactly what kind of player Ken was. He didn't have one weapon. He had a primary weapon that forced you to make yourself vulnerable everywhere else. And then he used everywhere else. That is not tactics. That is something much closer to manipulation.
1977, I'm playing Ken in a tournament final in Asia. I win, but let me tell you something, it was not easy. And Ken was 43 years old. 43. Think about that for a second. I was in my mid-20s, at the peak of my game, one of the best players in the world. And this man, this small, quiet 43-year-old man, was making me work for every single point. Not particularly big, not particularly fast, by any reasonable standard. Nothing about him looked dangerous standing next to you in the locker room. And yet there he was, still competing, still finding the right angle, still moving to the right position before you even decided where you were hitting. That's not right. Nobody should still be doing that at 43, nobody. The human body doesn't work that way. Athletes peak, they decline, they retire. That's the natural order of things. Ken apparently never got that memo. or he got it and just decided it didn't apply to him. Either way, it wasn't right. It wasn't natural. And honestly, it was the most impressive thing I ever saw in tennis.
1974. Ken was 39 years old. He reached the final of Wimbledon and the final of the US Open in the same year. 2 Grand Slam finals at 39. People forget this. Or they remember it as a sentimental story, the old man who almost made it. That is the wrong way to look at it completely. To reach those finals, he had to beat players who were younger, bigger, stronger. He had to win under pressure in 5 sets over 2 weeks, twice in the same year. That is not sentiment, that is performance. What I took from studying Ken was this. He understood something about expectation that most players never figure out. When you are 39, nobody expects you to win. Nobody is truly afraid of you. And Ken used that completely. He walked onto the court with every psychological advantage available because his opponent had already decided somewhere in the back of their mind that this would be manageable. It was never manageable. Age was not his weakness. Age was his weapon.
Okay, so here's what drives me absolutely crazy when people talk about the greatest of all time. They look at the trophies, they count the Grand Slams. Fine, I understand that. But with Ken specifically, that conversation is completely broken before it even starts. 11 years. 11 years. He was banned from every Grand Slam because he turned professional. 1957 to 1968, the best years of his career, gone. Not because he lost, not because he got injured, because of a rule that basically said, you're too good, you want to get paid, so we're locking you out. Can you imagine Federer banned from Wimbledon for 11 years? Nadal banned from Roland Garros for 11 years. We'd never stop talking about the injustice of it. But with Ken, somehow people just move on. They count 8 Grand Slams and shrug. You cannot be serious. You cannot punish a man for 11 years and then rank him based on the trophies he collected in the years he was actually allowed to play. That is not a ranking. That is an insult dressed up as a statistic.
There's something I think about when people ask me to define greatness in tennis. Not a single title, not a single season, something longer than that. Ken Rosewall competed at the highest level across 3 decades, 3 completely different generations of opponents. The players who tried to beat him in the 50s were gone by the time he was winning Grand Slams in the 70s. Entire careers came and went while Ken was still there, still precise, still dangerous, still making people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite explain. That's not a hot streak. That's not one great year or one great surface. That is something that has no real name in sport. Most players conquer their generation. Ken conquered 3 of them. Every time the sport thought it had moved past him, he was already waiting on the other side. No announcements, no drama, just results. I want it to be mentioned in the same sentence as Ken Rosewall. I still think that's the right thing to aim for. Because in the end, what he built wasn't just a career, it was a standard. And standards like that, they don't age, they don't retire, they just stay there waiting for someone to reach them.